Well, hello everyone. We've got a superstar panel with some of the top people and companies in the field. So with that, my brief introduction, I'm Michael Davidsen. I'm a reporter. I write for Xconomy. We're a tech blog. But now for the speakers to introduce themselves.
Hi guys, I'm Dorothee Bergin. I work on platform partnerships at Xad.
David Shim, founder and CEO of Placed.
Hi, I'm Opie. I'm responsible for the analytics team at Datalogix.
So these companies kind of run the full course of the attribution problem, and both kind of where things are now, and they have definite opinions on where things are going to be 2 or 3 years from now. So I'll kind of start with Dorothee. Xad works with pretty much the full circle, advertisers as well, and marketers. Just what is your company and your personal thoughts on where attribution is right now?
Yeah, so I think at Xad we feel that this is key to everything that we're doing. We work very closely with both of these companies. I'd say the vast majority of our agency campaigns run some sort of offline attribution against them. In a world where 90% of retail conversions still happen in store, you're not measuring the full spectrum of value that we're driving with our mobile campaigns if you're not looking at sales lift or store visitation lift. So it's key to everything we do.
And so the key linkage between what people actually see on their mobile devices and what they go and buy, all of your companies are taking very different or very interesting approaches to that. Why don't we start with David? What is Placed's approach to making that connection?
Yeah, so we've got a panel that represents about 1 in every 500 adults in the US. They've double opted in by installing an application that allows us to measure where they go in the physical world 24/7. So we see about 1,000 latitude and longitudes per user per day. On top of that, we get things like accelerometer, gyroscope, compass. So we get to see that pure view of where is somebody actually in the physical world. And what we do is we work with partners like Xad to then take this opt-in panel data that we have from the user, and because it's opt-in, we get things like email address, we get device ID, we get where their home is, where their work is, because we're giving them something back. So we really are focusing around that value exchange with each one of our panelists, that we either pay them, make a charitable donation on their behalf, or actually give them premium features in-app. So by giving that first-party level data, you can actually join that with third-party sets to say, saw an ad on Xad, and then actually went into the physical store, and then also going in and actually saying what was the lift between people exposed versus unexposed.
And Datalogix, which now is affiliated with Oracle, you guys kind of bring it all back home because you are looking at purchasing data to the order of trillions.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little about that?
You bet. That's absolutely right. And I guess I maybe deeper than affiliated. Oracle's the boss now, which is good. But anyway, so the traditional Datalogix business model, and I love this because here we are talking about mobile attribution. It wasn't that long ago at Datalogix that it was an offline marketing co-op, which means it helped people figure out where the catalogs should go. And that sounds like a really sleepy industry, and I think in many respects it is. What's really cool about it is that you get this tremendous volume of transaction information, and you kind of have to know where everybody in the United States lives, because if they pay us a nickel for a name and then we send it to the wrong address, we've got a big problem. And so our data asset a little different in that we have basically the name and address for everybody in the United States, and then we've made these anonymous linkages into the online world and into the mobile world so that we can then compare the impressions that people see, compare and contrast that against the transactions that they ultimately make.
So Dorothee, your company works with marketers, advertisers, people looking to figure this out. When they're approaching you, what kind of questions are they asking? What is their knowledge of how this attribution works? Obviously, they think mobile ads are important, but the big questions for them, I imagine, has to be ROI, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that as we work with clients, there's a couple types of problems we're trying to solve. The first is foundational accuracy in the media campaigns. So are we targeting the right folks? Is it someone at that address? People are really concerned about data when it comes to mobile location. So at Xad, we work really hard to make sure all the data we use is correct, and we have custom proprietary polygons that actually outline the physical walls of a business. So we know that someone's not just walking by Starbucks, they're actually in Starbucks, and that puts them into a Starbucks audience. And then I think from there, once you've got the right target audience, you're finding people on mobile. Our clients, by and large, all recognize the fact that the transactions aren't largely happening on the phone today, right? There's a lot of buzz about things like mobile payments, but the reality is most folks are walking up and walking into a physical store and transacting in a pretty traditional manner. So having strong partners that can help us close the loop is absolutely vital to doing that.
And where is Placed's role in this? You have a very specific approach to how what happens when that person walks into that store.
Yeah, so we have the panel data set. So when someone walks into a store, it's not just one latitude and longitude. When you think about it, when you go to a Costco, it's the latitude and longitude that you drove into the parking lot, that you walked into the store. As you start to walk around the store, you're constantly generating location data. So for Placed, we see on average about 80 latitude and longitudes per store visit per user. So it's not just one point, because once you're deep into that Costco, that location data might go to cell phone, and then all of a sudden that blue dot that you typically see on Google, even though you're in the Costco, shows you 6 blocks away because it's doing cell phone triangulation. So you have to understand that full path so you can bring it all back together. And I think from our approach overall for attribution is to be really agnostic. We think the market requires a currency, and I think Datalogix is in the same boat here, where you don't sell media, that you've separated media from attribution, so you have that independent third party that can go in and say, hey, it doesn't matter if the campaign worked or didn't work. From our perspective, it's about giving you the accurate data. Versus on the other side, if you are also selling the media and the attribution, you run into issues where there's a conflict of interest. There might not naturally be on the back end, but there's just that perception. And I think you see that over and over again when you look at TV, there's Nielsen. When you look at online, there's ComScore. Before Google acquired them, DoubleClick was independent. So it's really been a market that's been about this independent third-party attribution.
Right. I think Nielsen is an interesting comparison here. I mean, they really pioneered the panel. Who would know that panels measured these sorts of things until we learned about Nielsen and TVs when we were young. So that's, it's very interesting that the problem right now is getting people into stores, identifying them, seeing what ads they've seen. You take the panel approach, but that is not the only approach. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the other strategies companies are using?
Yeah, sure. So I think when you think about measuring store visitation lift, there's really 2 ways to do it. One is a panel. The other way would be an ad request or impression-based model where you're looking at, all of the folks that saw ads, where they were, and then did they appear later in a store. I think we feel strongly that panel right now is a methodology that's very vetted. It's, everything about the panelists. There's no bias. You can very accurately measure lift using a panel-based methodology. With an ad request-based methodology, I think it can be directionally valuable, but right now it's tough. I think you'd have to have a huge amount of scale to be able to see folks that, not just saw the ad, but then reappeared later in one of the stores they were trying to drive visits to. And you'd have to have massive accuracy. I think a lot of folks in the industry talk about, oh, hey, we can target down to 3 meters or 50 meters, but that's actually technologically really hard to do and really, really hard to do at scale. So we believe very strongly in having sort of a panel-based methodology because of all the benefits that we've laid out. I think there's a lot of sort of 1.0 to 2.0 thinking going on, and I know that, we talked about this earlier when we were preparing for the panel. We could see more scalable solutions coming in the future, but I think today it's still sort of only directionally useful.
So we're getting to the point now where your companies are able to tell marketers with some accuracy, hey, people have seen these ads, people are now going to the stores, here's this connection. Actually buying stuff is probably the key step, ultimately the only thing that marketers are interested in. Robin, how does a company like Datalogix play with this when you're looking at lift, when you're looking at how consumers are actually opening up their wallets and shelling out bucks?
You bet. So we're kind of a panel-based approach as well, and I love the topic that you threw out, kind of panel 1.0 versus 2.0. So panel 1.0 was something that came along in the 50s and the 60s, I think, not entirely sure, but this notion that you have 50 or 60,000 people that you know a lot about, and you can see what media they consume and watch what they purchase and that kind of thing. we're talking about 50, 60 million people, and we're looking for all of the impressions that we see. And then at least in the Datalogix case, a very standard kind of attribution study that we would do would be maybe Procter & Gamble spends a couple $100,000 on Facebook, and they want to know how much more Tide was purchased because they spent that $200,000. Not just did the people that saw it buy, but did they buy more, and how much more did they buy? And so in our case, we've integrated directly with Facebook so that they can tell us, in an anonymous way, of course, but so that they can tell us who was exposed to those impressions. And then we also do a ton of loyalty card analytics, and we've connected and integrated with a lot of offline transaction partners so that we can actually see 50, 60 million people worth of grocery data. And then our analytics say, great, if they saw, and lots of like test and control methodologies and lots of really hardcore analytics to figure that out. But at the end of the day, we look and we find folks that didn't see impressions that look exactly like the folks that did, and then we see how much more the folks that saw the impressions spent. And so lots and lots of work going into more and more advertisers figuring out how to look for that true incrementality there and direct marketing budgets in that direction.
Right, and that kind of brings us to a concept that David has mentioned to me and elsewhere. With the technology issues, we're kind of at attribution 1.0, just figuring out the nuts and bolts of how it's going to work, how we're going to find these people are in the stores. But the key is getting the lift, and it's that incremental part, knowing that I bought product X over Y because of ad A. How do you guys tackle that? Because again, that is the really valuable piece of information. And I'll let whoever wants to take it. It's your concept, so why not go there?
So the big part about 1.0 is 2013, we introduced placed attribution, got a little bit of traction. Early partner was Xad. They were actually our launch partner. So they were really early in this process. And it was about going in and showing advertisers mobile worked. So when you think about mobile right now, about 25% of mobile ad spend in the US, it belongs to app installs. So that's saying 3/4 of the ad spend is brand advertisers, restaurants, all that other good stuff. That's tiny when you think about it. App installs make 1/4 of all mobile revenue today. That's a ridiculous amount that highlights there's a huge opportunity. And the reason why it makes up 1/4 is because they have really great attribution. There's companies out there that do attribution across all these ad networks to say who gets credit for that app install. And people have said, this is the lifetime value for each install. I know how much exactly I need to spend. I think what we want to do is get to that same point when it's with optimization 2.0 or attribution 2.0, is to be able to not only run a campaign, but then actually start to in-flight optimize for store visitation, to go in and say, did they buy something? Because you don't want to wait 3-4 months after the campaign. You don't want to say, hey, I just spent $100,000 and it didn't work, and here's my learnings, and I'd like a little bit more budget for the next quarter. And I think with Xad, we've worked really closely with is they do optimize. They do take that data, and you start to shift. And you see that over and over again. I think if you look at display, and you think about programmatic and all the trading desks that are out there, the DSPs, it's all about optimization in real time. It's not about like, hey, let me wait till the end of the campaign anymore.
Yeah, maybe building on that a little bit. I think I love this notion of attribution 2.0, and you're right. Today, a campaign runs, somebody spends $100,000 or $200,000, they wait 12 weeks, they find out it didn't work, and then they have to go ask for more budget, right? And you want to move into that scenario where you're telling them soon enough for them to make a change and for them to make that campaign work. I also see attribution spreading in a couple more directions. The first one, so you talked about there being multiple publishers and where did the value come from, right? A lot of people, back to that Procter & Gamble example, we'll give them a report for Facebook, but they also ran impressions on Twitter, and they ran impressions that, mobile impressions, and they ran open web impressions and that kind of thing, and they want us to know, and ideally they want to know when it's happening and they can still shift budget, which impressions are driving the most lift here. Those are analytically very, very difficult problems to solve, but that is absolutely where it's running. And then I think the next tier, and this is where the agencies, I think in particular, are going to get really excited, which populations are responding to which messages, right? And so you get from this point today where you can say, wow, I ran a campaign on Facebook, did it work or not, to which publisher works better, to which audiences are responding, maybe even to which impressions on each publisher, to, wow, I've got 6 or 7 creatives that I can, creative messages that we think are going to resonate with different groups. So how do we get deeper and deeper and deeper into this question so that we can start optimizing in real time for audience, for maybe the next one is, gosh, this person's already seen 9 impressions, Is it more valuable to show them a 10th impression for the same brand, or gosh, maybe a first impression for something entirely different? And so what I love is that all this data is finally coming together, and there are tons and tons of really smart companies that are figuring out how to drive very actionable results and very measurable improvements in bringing it together in different ways. And I think we're all working to broaden our footprint, to go broader and deeper. And as that happens, I think the value is just going to continue to skyrocket. It's really exploding right now.
And that's where the budgets will come from too. When you can show that it actually works, then the dollars come in naturally. Right now for mobile, a lot of cases it's forced, because if you look at a mobile ad campaign, let's say it's for a Gap sweatshirt, and you see a banner ad and you click on that, are you then going to go to the mobile website, find the size that you like, find the color that you like, then put your credit card information, then your shipping information, all in a mobile browser? Probably not. And we see it time and time again. Those campaigns don't typically have positive ROI. For every dollar you spend, you're losing 80 cents. But when you start to look at it from a cross-device or even a cross kind of channel perspective, you're seeing conversions that happen on desktop, on tablet. You also see conversions that actually occur in the physical world. And to Dorothee's point before, 9 out of 10 conversions happen in the physical world. So we're only counting 10% of the conversions right now that are digital only.
So how do you keep the marketing people, the brands, the advertisers, possibly even at some point small and medium-sized businesses that are kind of doing this maybe even on their own, how do you keep them from being swamped? I mean, you've got some really interesting, compelling data. You can show ROI, but for someone who's not a data scientist, and this is kind of in XAD's direction, correct?
Sure. I mean, too much data is always a problem. I think when we work with a client to set up a campaign, we always want to be really clear about what we're optimizing towards. And usually we'll try to steer folks away from having a landing page where you're ordering a sweater and putting in your address, because what mobile is really about is messaging people while they're in the physical world. So not optimizing to the content on the page, but the context around them. So can you find folks when they're near a Gap so that they can actually pop in and buy that sweater? And so then, once you've narrowed down what you're actually doing with the campaign, it's much easier to understand what data is important to that advertiser. So it's something that we work on a lot. And I think the point is right on, where we've got the data that shows lift. We've activated the real world with these mobile campaigns, but we now need to make it actionable so that clients, without needing to do much work, can have this optimizing in real time, have the data be fed into companies like XAD in a really granular way, so that we can start to have real-time optimization like we do in desktop and a lot of other models.
So thinking about challenges that could keep the attribution technology from really blossoming, it seems like we have technological challenges, but people are kind of figuring that out. Are people on board with having their smartphones track them into a store and then following their purchases and then being able to link the two and provide me with more ads? I mean, I'm sure it comes up. Datalogix has been very cognizant of it. Does anyone here want to tackle the privacy issue?
I can start, but I think we'd all say it's absolutely paramount and top of mind. I think as an XAD, we've been incredibly slow to launch certain products where, our team's like, guys, the whole market's doing this, but we want to make sure that the way we're using the data is completely vetted, completely privacy compliant, maybe even a little conservative, to ensure that, we're not in any kind of danger in this area. It's, I think, something that is absolutely important for the industry to stay ahead of as a whole.
No, and then from our perspective, it's key. You want to be upfront. I think if you're upfront with consumers, you don't run into problems down the road. I think if you look at digital and desktop 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of issues with cookies, tracking, software, add-ons. You don't see that anymore because the industry's learned and said this will not work, and people will not work with partners that do that. So from our perspective, we've really taken the approach of double opt-in. We're actually doing a value exchange with the panelists where we're paying them, we're giving them something in return. And I think the best example of that is if you look at our apps that we own and operate, we also partner with third-party apps, but the ones that we own over 1 million installs. The average App Store rating for the panel app is 4.1 stars. Our Give to Charity app has 4.3 stars. So, and millions of installs. So it's really highlighting, if you're upfront with the consumer why you want the data and what you're going to do with it, you don't run into issues. Where you run into the issues is, hey, I've been storing it in the background, I did all this stuff, and then someone writes an expose about it.
I actually think, and it's interesting as an analyst, right, in some ways, the need to respect consumer privacy slows down the progress we can make analytically, right? Because we're deliberately making rules about, not which data sets can't be combined and that kind of thing. That said, I don't think the importance of really respecting consumer privacy in this space can be understated. I really don't. Like every time you read about some huge data breach, and the space is filled with misinformation. I remember when we launched with Facebook, we were using, at the time, data from the front of the store from one of the large pharmacy kind of, like a CVS, Walgreens type of thing. And we were literally just looking to see if more Fritos got sold. And sure enough, in the press, the picture was Facebook has all of your prescription data. And it was a picture of that company and the pharmacy sign. And surprise, surprise, that company is a little gun shy now about using their data to, and so I think there's a responsibility for the press to be very, very careful in the way they report these things. It's so easy to kind of go after the big headline and what you think is going to create a stir and that kind of thing. And then as companies, we have to be incredibly responsible and make sure that we aren't giving people a reason to write these articles. It was very interesting. I think thus far, consumers understood how responsible we were being with their data. On our site, consumers can come and they can opt out of basically everything we do. And in fact, back to that comment on the press, many of the articles said, go to the Datalogix website to opt out of all Facebook tracking. Not that we had anything to do with what Facebook was doing. We were terrified because we thought our site was just going to get pounded with everybody who finally saw their first opportunity to not have Facebook track anything. And I think it bumped up to like 5,000 a day. So it, at least at the time, wasn't a huge concern for consumers. And I think that's because the industry hasn't given them a reason so far for it to be a big concern, right? So as long as the right companies are putting the right policies in place and really realizing that this isn't something we have to work around to get our job done, it's the thing that enables us to do our job. And without it, we're kind of like game over, right? I mean, it's a company ender if you really have a big privacy problem, maybe even an industry ender. So to me, it's a huge priority for us at Datalogix. I probably spend between a third and a half of my time figuring out how to do things in a very privacy-friendly way. Infrastructure all the way to, we've talked with certain impression partners about putting boxes out on jointly owned infrastructure that humans can't interface at all. They send their granular data in, we send our granular data in, and no one can actually see it. The software just spits an answer out the bottom. Here was the lift, plus or minus. Like that kind of stuff where humans can't get in and potentially abuse the data, critical here. I really agree. Or I love the opt-in approach as well, where people are just saying, yep, this is my data and you can have it because I know why you're using it and I'm good with that.
And it's important, if you want to have a common currency that people can use and trust over and over again, you can't have something that XAD uses that bites them in the ass like 4 months down the road. And I think with Datalogix, with what we're doing, we're very transparent. This is how we get the data, that it makes XAD comfortable that they can sell that into their next client, and that they don't have to worry about, hey, 6 months down the road, if something comes down where Congress says X, am I going to get in trouble? No, this is the right way that they're doing it.
Oh, sorry, one last piece comment. The other piece is I think the biggest trend right now in terms of managing privacy is sort of a trend toward industry self-regulation. So, I made that kind of weird comment about the catalogs years ago. That was a huge privacy flap in the late 80s and the early 90s. And they were able to successfully get together as an industry and put the mechanisms in place that gave consumers comfort, that they were going to get value because the catalogs were going to make more sense, we're going to save a bunch of trees, those kinds of things, and that their privacy could be protected. Same thing happened in the desktop world. After some missteps, for sure, I think the last thing we'd ever want to do is say, hey, government, why don't you collect all the data to make sure no one's using the data? And so, in general, I've seen that the self-regulatory regimes, the IAB, the NAB, et cetera, or NAI, gathering a lot of steam, and that feels like the right way to manage this.
So one thing I've read quite a bit about is, when looking at location, is beacons. Are they what their capabilities are now? Are they the future? If you're a shop owner, do you want this device you can buy and then stick in your store. What are your thoughts on the role they could be playing in the attribution scheme? Well, I start with Dorothee.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of excitement about beacons, and it's warranted in a way, because talk about store visit attribution. You could attribute a visit to an aisle in a store with a beacon. It's incredibly accurate. And that's a really sexy idea, right? That we could get this kind of data and apply it to our marketing campaigns. I think right now we're living in a world where beacons aren't that prevalent. It's just not scalable. And so we're at XAD, we're able to take in data from beacons and work with it right now, but we haven't activated it because it's just so small. So I think beacons is one of those things that could change the game, could become really interesting in our space when it becomes, or if it becomes scaled.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm in the same boat. I don't think beacons are the end-all be-all. I don't think they deserve the hype that they get today. If you want to look back 4 years ago, look at NFC. That was the big hype thing. Everyone's going to put a little sticker on there. You swipe your phone and you can buy whatever you want. Go back 4 more years after that. That was QR codes. Everyone had a barcode scanning app. You scan it, it takes you to a website. And then before that was RFID chips. So it's always come around. And the problem that you run into, it's a physical thing that has to be implemented. And whenever you have to implement something physically in the store, who owns it? Who owns beacons when it comes to a Walmart, a Starbucks, a 24-hour fitness? There's not an owner of that product. And then once they have to actually figure out who the owner is, how do I set that up? Where do I actually place those beacons? And then once you have those beacons in place, you have to do something with them. So people don't realize beacons don't pull in and store data. You actually have to build an app that runs in background, that gets BLE, that then pulls that data set down, that then does something with that data. And you have to, a lot of times it might be a push ad. It's like, yeah, it's great. Is the consumer going to keep that app installed because I get a bunch of push ads? Probably not. So they haven't found that kind of holy grail to say this is what is going to make beacons catch on fire.
So 4 years from now, when we're back here and we're not talking about beacons, but we're talking about how the attribution problem has been solved, we figured this all out, and we're kind of looking at the issues that will be coming, 4 years from now, the near future. What do you think some of those will be, and what should the people in the audience keep their minds on when they look out on the horizon?
I think something that will be really interesting in the next couple of years, so farther on the horizon, is mobile payments. So how does that change the game in terms of the kinds of data that we can get, not just on what you're buying, but where you're buying it? Can we access that information in a way that makes it actionable for marketers? That's a trend that I would say will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'd say programmatic in the physical world. So I think you hear a lot about the digital world, everything's going programmatic. I think you have to go to attribution 1.0, 2.0. There's a lot of 3, 4, 5, 6.0s in there as well. But once you get past that, you're going to find that it is going to be a system that you could optimize against, so that you could say, I want more people to come to the store. I want more people to buy Crest toothpaste. Well, here are the things that you can do automatically or programmatically to get that done.
I think the first thing you're going to see is that all of the data sets have come together. So thinking about the panel that was here about an hour ago, the credit card data, right? It's amazing that transaction data right now can't be connected to impression data. And so all of those problems, that huge web of stuff that has to get connected is going to. And then I think we're going to understand an awful lot more about the purchase funnel and which ads need to be shown on which devices and in what context to really drive toward that optimal outcome, right? So if you are at the store, absolutely it's mobile. If you're at home, maybe it's a different device, those kinds of things, and the data sets will be there to hopefully draw those conclusions.
Well, I think we're winding down. Maybe one very quick question or two. Otherwise, we have to exit stage left. Looks like you covered everything.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you
you.
guys.